What's up in War Eagle War Report family? You got Ike Jones back with another morning drop. And today we're talking about rising stock for returning players. So guys who maybe would have been under the radar, maybe didn't get a lot of minutes last season, but expect to have big impact for the Auburn Tigers based upon their performance so far this spring. Let's talk about it. Y'all know how we do right here, War Report style. Just drop it on them.
You are now listening to the War Report. Drop.
Morning drop. It is Tuesday, April the 2nd, and we are here talking more Auburn football. Spring is almost over for Auburn. A-Day game coming up this Saturday. Only a few practices left, and we want to talk about who is impressing during the spring that maybe you weren't expecting to have a big role this season, or you haven't seen a lot of. Maybe you expected it, but you hadn't seen very much of them so far. We're going to talk about some under-the-radar players that are returning for Auburn football this season. Before we get into the conversation, please do the necessary. Sharing the content, whether you're listening on podcast, you want to share the podcast link, or you're watching this video, please share that out there with people, and I definitely appreciate that. If you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button, but let's get into the conversation today on the morning drop here on the Auburn Express, powered by the War Rapport. And we're going to talk about football rising stock for a couple of players. And who's getting a stock upgrade? There are quite a few players I expect to have a bigger role this season. I can talk about the role that I think a guy like Jay Fair is going to have on this team as a primary weapon from the slot. I could talk about some of the offensive linemen that, definitely are going to come back, like Connor Liu, that's going to have the starting position from the beginning of the season. But those are guys who I think people expect to have a good year, right? I'm going to talk about a couple of guys who maybe they had a rough time of it before, or you haven't seen very much of. None of the three guys I'm going to talk about really had a rough last season, but I do expect them to have bigger years this year and a different kind of role. You're going to see their snap count go up, and you're going to see their usage go up very much so this season. Let's start the conversation with a guy who had a good season last year, but I think he has taken on a different kind of role with this team, and that's Keldrick Faulk. Keldrick Faulk coming in off of a good freshman campaign at Auburn. He didn't have, a stellar effort out there as far as production is gone. He's a guy coming into this season that has said himself that he wants to take a better or a bigger leadership role on that defensive front with the absence of Marcus Harris this year. And he realized that the competition was stiffer in the SEC than it had been in high school. And he's taken on the responsibility this season to say he's going to step up his play, his leadership, his effort continuously throughout the season to make sure that this defense performs at a different level. Let's take a look at, kind of what he did last year. Played in 13 games last year, had 21 solo tackles and 14 assisted tackles for a total of 35 tackles on the season. 3.5 tackles for loss last year. With 1 sack. Sacks were a big thing that he said he wanted to improve his numbers on. He wanted to be, up towards 8, maybe even to the double digit of sacks guys for this team this season, which would be a significant improvement over last season. So if he's able to make the kind of leap that he's holding himself to, he already said that he wants to, double pretty much what he was able to output last season for tackles, right? So if he's going to be into the range where he's got 70 tackles on the season, and he's getting into the 8 to 10 range in sacks, that's a definite upgrade for Keldrick Faulk in his sophomore season. He can help this team out a lot with a defensive line, as I talked about if you watched yesterday's show or listened to yesterday's show, a defensive line that is thin. Right, there's not a lot of rotational pieces that are there for this defensive line right now. Not a lot of returning snaps there for this team. The addition of Trill Carter and Gage Keys absolutely helps with that. But Gage Keys, in my opinion, is a little undersized for an interior defensive lineman in the SEC. He's going to have to win in a very different way. And then Trill Carter, I don't know what the number of snaps that he's going to be doing. He's going to want to get back closer to his Minnesota snap count in order to really have the impact in his final season in collegiate football. But Keldrick Falk has said he wants to step into that Marcus Harris role as a defensive tackle, likely going to be sliding in, playing more interior defensive line this season as opposed to the D end role that he played for the vast majority of last season. So as a D tackle and still playing some defensive end, the productivity for Keldrick Falk in this season is going to be crucial for this defense in order to be able to do the things that Coach DJ Durkin wants to do with this defense. He is known for having ferocious front sevens. Keldrick Falk needs to be a difference maker along that defensive front, and he has put himself up there in this range where he says he wants to double his productivity. I'm going to hold the young man to that, and I am going to say he's going to go out there and he's going to do work for this Auburn defensive line coming into this season. I've got Keldrick Falk as my first guy that you want to walk out. I've got Keldrick Falk as my first guy that you want to buy stock in right now if you're watching for risers on this Auburn defensive front. Next up, let's talk about a guy who I think, I've been very high on in his effort and his energy, and that's Micah Riley. Micah Riley, had an opportunity to talk and sit down with Mike G, and you can view that content right here on the channel. The interview between he and Mike G is right here on our YouTube page. But Micah's a guy who, from just a physical standpoint, is able to go out there and dominate his opponents because he's just a big dude, man. He is a big dude, and he is not afraid of contact. He's willing to go out there and really block effectively. He had some moments last season where he wasn't doing what he needed to do in certain situations. I think he's got his mind right now, and he's going to be a guy that's going to factor into this offense in a very different way. Luke Deal, on his final year of eligibility, decided to come back to the program, I think more from a leadership standpoint, because I do expect Micah Riley to take some of those snaps this season that Luke Deal had last year. He is a capable pass catcher for this team, and he is a willing blocker for this team. I'm expecting him to do big things this season. Last year, he only had the one touchdown, if you all recall, the pass from Robbie Ashford that he got late in game, kind of during garbage duty. But, if you go back to kind of what brought him to Auburn and the hype around him as far as being a pass-catching tight end, his high school season, his high school years, he was known as a pass-catching target. Now, he is not of the mold of a Rivaldo Fairweather. So he's not going to go out there and he's not going to give you a lot of the, one-on-one, back shoulder, highlight type of catches. But he is going to be a guy, if Peyton Thorne, who is the presumptive starter right now at quarterback for Auburn, is able to get some sort of chemistry going with him, he can be a bailout guy for you. A lot of what happens with the RPO offense, particularly when you're using Thorne as a runner, is you end up having kind of the speed sweep underneath. And then you have kind of the block and then rollout situation from the other tight end. So if one tight end maybe is coming, on the underneath when they're doing the RPO fake on the give to the running back, and you have the either, slot receiver or the tight end that's going to be coming underneath for the quick dump out. We saw that a few times with Rivaldo Fairweather. What usually becomes that second level throw for the quarterback as an option is a tight end that's on the end man of the line of scrimmage, is coming up and blocking or faking a block, reverse pivot back out, and they have the pass there to that guy as the quarterback rolls out. You've got the outlet underneath there, and then they get into like a 3-level throw. We'll look at it on tape at some point in time, and I'll explain to you guys a little bit more on Watch the Film exactly what I'm talking about when I say this. But Micah Riley can be that guy that can be that outlet for the quarterback in those types of scenarios. And I think that he can be a guy that can box out on third down if you need to get a third and short and you want to just be able to have somebody go out, be physical at the catch point, and be able to make a contested catch in that sort of way. I think he's a guy that can do that sort of thing. And then this was a big thing for this offense last year, being able to threaten the seam of defenses, because it's a place where defenses were basically daring Auburn to throw the football up the seam quite a few times. We hit it a couple of times, missed it pretty badly some other times, but it was available a lot for the tight end up the seam. I think Micah Riley can be that sort of threat, particularly if you still have Rivaldo Fairweather and you're going to go into some sort of 11 personnel grouping or even 22 personnel grouping, right? Having more tight ends on the field, I expect Micah Riley to be one of those guys out there a little bit more prevalently as a pass catcher and a blocker this season for Auburn coming up. Look out for Micah Riley this season. All right, just like I did yesterday, I only have 3 names for you. There are a lot of other folks that I definitely could talk about in this category. But before I get into my final name that I have here, definitely want to give a shout out to the day's sponsor, which is RogueShop.com, America's #1 online dispensary. Use code Rapport when you go over there. Get you a little something off your purchase. Sleep, stress, pain, anxiety relief, all there for you at the Rogue Shop. Make sure you use code Rapport. That tells them the War Report sent you, and you get a little something off of your purchase. All right, let's finish up here and talk about my final name that I have. Before I get into that final name again, I just want to give some honorable mentions out here to folks who I think will have a better season based upon what I've seen so far in the spring. Let's start that conversation at the offensive line and talk about Isaiah Miller. He had a rough first year for Auburn, giving up quite a few sacks around the edge, some penalties that didn't need to happen. I think, he's reshaped his body a little bit in this offseason, and he's ready to come in, compete at that outside tackle position over there. I think that he's going to be a guy that could definitely he could have made this list for me this year. You could talk about guys like Damari Alston. You guys know, if you watch or listen to this channel, how much of a fan I am of Damari Alston and just the way that he runs. I think he's one of the more complete running backs on this team. Can do a little bit of everything, but very much a downhill runner, very shifty. I could have, talked about how I feel like his stock is going to rise if he can avoid the injury bug that kind of set him back last season. He definitely can be a guy that would make this list for Auburn. But let's get into the final name that I have on here. I mention a lot of guys. I think Cam Coleman's had a good spring, but I want to talk about one other name, and I'm going to talk about Colton Hood. I think that Colton Hood is firmly in position to be one of the outside corners for Auburn this season. He's a guy that I loved the effort and the energy that he played with in that bowl game. I liked the way that he just kind of he's a guy that I think just kind of understands the game of football, where he needs to be and how he needs to perform to be a contributor. I am big on Colton Hood right now. How many snaps he's going to get this year, I don't know what the final number is going to be, but it's going to be more than he got last year. Colton Hood is going to be a guy that I think is going to be out here and doing some good things for this Auburn defense. He's just an assignment sound, physical corner that can be out there, and he's sticky when he's playing in his position. He understands his zone principles really well. This is something, for all of the great things that you had from DJ James and Nehemiah Pritchett, they were more press corners, right? Like they played a lot better when they were out there on the island and they were playing in press man. Colton Hood's a guy that I think can do a little bit of both. He's not as good in the one-on-one man matchups as a DJ James was or as a Nehemiah Pritchett was. Just Pritchett's speed allowing him to be able to do that. I think he's a little bit better and more willing tackler than both of those guys are, and I think he plays in zone a little bit better than both of those guys did, which allows the defense to be a bit more versatile when you have a guy that can play those zone principles really well and can give you some one-on-one man coverage and be a problem for guys with his physicality at the point of attack at the offensive line, or the defensive line, I should say, or the line of scrimmage, let's say it that way. I'm big on Colton Hood. I think Colton Hood can be a ball player for this Auburn defense going into next season. There are a lot of guys that are out there that I think, are really good in this defensive secondary. Let's be clear about that. I think Colton Hood's a guy that's going to be able to get out there and really compete for Auburn this season. There's been a lot of hype being made about some other people. Don't sleep on Colton Hood. Buy stock right now if you're an Auburn Tigers fan in that young man. All right, that's it. That's my list. I told you I was only going to give you 3 names. I could have given you like 6, really, based upon some of the things that I've been hearing. But it's that time. I want to hear your thoughts. Who are the guys that you feel like people need to stop sleeping on this young man? They didn't have maybe enough snaps last season, or maybe didn't have a great first season, but don't sleep on the fact that they are going to be awakening in this next year for the Auburn football team. Tell me what your thoughts are right down there in the comments, or you can @me on Twitter, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate you all jumping in here with me. Again, today's morning drop is brought to you by the good folks at the Rogue Shop. Make sure you head over there, rogueshop.com, using code Rapport. Before you get out of here, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll be back at you with another morning drop tomorrow. But until then, and as always, War Eagle.